Theresa Firestine. I'm from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics in the U.S. Department of Transportation. I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the issues that we had in seasonally adjusting transportation data series due to COVID-19 and sort of the lingering effects from that. So BTS seasonally adjusts roughly 20 data series monthly. This includes data series featured in BTS's air traffic press release, the inputs to BTS's Transportation Services Index, and vehicle miles traveled featured in the Federal Highway Administration's Traffic Volume and Trends monthly release. BTS performs concurrent seasonal adjustment. This allowed BTS to account for the effects of COVID-19 in real time. However, BTS experienced difficulty with overadjustment in additive models and forecast inaccuracies. I'm going to talk just about the issues for the inputs to the Transportation Services Index, which I'm going to refer to as the TSI in short. So let me first give you a little bit about background about the TSI so you can understand the significance of these effects. The TSI measures the volume of freight and passenger transportation services provided monthly by the for-hire transportation sector in the US. The for-hire transportation consists of services provided by transportation firms to industries and the public for a fee. So airlines, railroads, and common carrier trucking companies are examples of for-hire transportation. BTS combines multiple for-hire transportation data series, as you can see in this figure here, and produces three indexes: a freight index, a passenger index, and a combined index. And in combining these, we seasonally adjust each of the data series, we weight them, and then finally chain them. The TSI is an economic indicator. It signals periods of economic growth and decline. For example, during periods of economic growth, the demand for goods increases and industries require additional freight transportation services to move finished products and acquire raw materials. Likewise, during periods of economic growth, we see consumer spending and confidence increase and unemployment decline, which results in more trips by air, rail, and transit for work and pleasure. BTS releases the TSI monthly. The data inputs are available with a 2-month lag for most modes. This means when BTS releases data in June, the series is through April. Some data series lag by more than 2 months, and for these, BTS forecasts the data to bring it in alignment with other data inputs. Ideally, BTS would like to forecast all the inputs of the TSI itself or the TSI itself to provide a more up-to-date picture of for-hire transportation activity given its significance as an economic indicator, and also to bring it in alignment with other economic indicators which typically lag by only 1 month. So let me turn to a little bit about the effects of COVID-19 on the TSI. COVID-19 and the 2020 economic recession caused transportation activity to decline, both freight and passenger, but freight activity declined less than passenger travel. The freight TSI reached its lowest point in April of 2020, declining 12% from the all-time high reached in 2019. Whereas the passenger TSI fell to an all-time low in April of 2020, which was 84% lower than the previous all-time low in September of 2001. So this is a very significant decline that we saw in the passenger TSI. The large declines caused issues with the one step ahead ARIMA forecasts used for the series lagging all of their inputs to the TSI. And so what we saw that initially with the March 2020 forecast, it failed to capture sort of the unexpected decline both in freight and passenger transportation activity resulting from the recession and from the stay-at-home orders, which took effect in that month. And then the depth of the decline among the passenger transportation series resulted in some negative one step ahead forecasts. So I'm going to go through a couple slides to show that. So this is freight transportation. So freight transportation, the forecasts were relatively unaffected by COVID-19. So in the top graph here, the blue line is the actual observed value, and the black X is the one step ahead forecast that we made with the data up to that month prior to it. So this is one of the series that we create a forecast for. As you can see, sort of that March 2020, our forecast was inaccurate, whereas in all the other months of 2020, we were actually fairly accurate despite the effects of COVID-19. And it really wasn't surprising that there's that decline in March of 2020 because air freight typically declines in March, which I've shown in the bottom graph that, we always sort of have this decline in March. So there was just a little bit deeper of a decline, but it sort of followed the general expected trend of a decline happening in March. We saw more significant effects on our passenger transportation data series. So at the top here, I have air revenue passenger miles, and at the bottom, I have public transit ridership. So what we ended up seeing here was that we ended up having negative values for some of the forecasts. You can see that in the lower graph for public transit ridership. In May of 2020, the one step ahead forecast was less than 0. And we also had sort of these very large forecast errors for public transit ridership that were sort of persistent throughout the year. And then we had the similar effects for our other passenger transportation modes. So where are we now in response to seeing sort of these the negative forecasts and the large forecast errors? We ended up withholding our release of the passenger transportation, the passenger TSI, to include only data that we had actual data for. And we're still continuing to see these sort of large forecast errors, although they are much smaller than they were in 2020. And we haven't yet brought back the forecast for the passenger TSI because we still don't feel that it's accurate enough. So you can see this sort of these effects in the table here. So the sort of second column, the air passenger revenue miles, sort of the mean absolute percent error for the one step ahead forecast is 33%, whereas sort of in the years prior to that, it's only just below 10% error. And then in 2021, the mean absolute percent error declined, but it's still sort of above what we were seeing in the previous years. And you can sort of see this in the data itself when you examine it. So in the two graphs at the very bottom, I have air revenue passenger miles on the left and rail passenger miles on the right. You can see that in 2019 and 2018, which are the top lines in both of those graphs, that they followed a very similar seasonal pattern in both years. Whereas in 2020, which is the black line at the very bottom, the regular seasonality that we were seeing before completely disappeared. And in 2021, we actually aren't seeing sort of the regular seasonal pattern reappear until the middle of the year. So we're still monitoring this and waiting to see when the pattern may return to the normal seasonal pattern. And that was everything that I had to present. I'm happy to answer any questions, and this is my contact information.
Thank you, Theresa. That was very interesting. So yes, if you don't mind hanging around at the end, and we will see if there's any questions from the audience.